Okay, here we go. Please join me in a short prayer. I'm going to use language, and I'm going to ask you to use your faith, use your beliefs, use your words, and it would be an honor to pray with you before we begin our work this evening. Say, Uchacha Shaksya Bat, Uchacha Shaksya Tapa, Uchacha Shaksya Kaya, Chacha to eat Slachi, Chacha to eat Yayusian, Asquadi of Chas to eat Yayaya, Asquadi of Chas, Yautis Yaya, Asquadi of Chas to eat Hodko. Asking you, Grandfather, Kaya, to bless this day, blessed this work, blessed this gathering, and blessed the words that we will share with one another this evening. Haitkasi.
Thank you, Warren, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us again tonight for the fourth and final panel discussion in our series. Many of you are returning participants. Thank you for joining us again and your continued input and support of the program. As you know, we've reached out to audiences to ask folks to help submit questions that could help guide our final program. So thank you for everyone who helped shape tonight's program. And please know that while this is our last panel, the museum will continue to support this conversation and more in an upcoming podcast that we hope to have available early next year. So keep your eyes out and your ears out for further information on continuing the conversation. Fort Nisqually was established as a Hudson's Bay Company trading post in 1833, and it was later reconstructed a century later on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. And with that, I'm just going to go right into introductions of our panelists tonight. Brandon Rainin, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and Assistant Director for the Puyallup Tribe. Brandon is an enrolled member of the Puyallup Tribe and the great-great-great-great-grandson of Hainuk, a treaty signer and Treaty War's warrior for the Puyallup. He has been working for the Puyallup Tribe since 2008. Charlotte Bosch. Charlotte is a Puyallup tribal member with Puyallup ties on her mother's side and Clatsop Nehalem on her father's. She is a descendant of the treaty warrior Squaxin, and the granddaughter of fishing warrior Reuben Wright Sr. Charlotte is the Historic Education Coordinator for the Puyallup Tribe's Historic Preservation Department, as well as a certified Lashute Seed language instructor. And this is the first time Charlotte has joined us as a panelist. Thank you for joining us. Danny Marshall, Tribal Chairman, Steilacoom Tribe. Danny is an elder and the current elected chairperson of the Steilacoom Indian Tribe. He has been documenting the history and telling the story of his people since the 1970s. As part of the Steilacoom Tribal Council, he continues on a path and family legacy of leaders dating to the 19th century. Danny has provided guidance to the Steilacoom Tribal Cultural Center and Museum during its inception and since it opened in 1989. And Danny is joining us here tonight from the waters outside of Cabo, so we're really pleased to have him go that distance for us. Thank you, Danny. Jerry Eckram, historian and author, Fort Nisqually Living History Museum. Jerry is a lifelong resident of Tacoma, has been involved with Fort Nisqually for many, many years, and is the author of Remembered Drums, A History of the Puget Sound Treaty War. And Warren King George, historian, Muckleshoot Indian Tribe. Warren is an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot tribe through his father's bloodline and a descendant of the Upper Skagit tribe through his late mother's bloodline. He has worked for the Muckleshoot Preservation Program since 2000. Our moderator tonight is Jennifer Ott, Assistant Director at HistoryLink.org. Jennifer is an environmental historian and has been leading HistoryLink's effort to increase and improve tribal history on the site, primarily through telling the stories of Washington's waterways. Applause all around. And introducing tonight's program, we'll go to a video here shortly. Are Curtis Bullchild, Tiana Bill, Cheyenne Dragonwolf, Casey Barton, and Claire Keller-Scholes. These individuals were invited by panelists for their unique ability to speak to the continued significance of the Medicine Creek Treaty and the Puget Sound Treaty War. We want to extend our thanks to these interviewees for sharing their knowledge and personal experiences and highlighting the lasting impacts of these historical events. And before I go to the video, as always, please use the chat and Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can interact with your panelists and one another that way.
My name is Curtis Michael Bullchild. That's my full name. I have an Indian name as well, which is Misumi Poye. And so I'll get into what that means in a little bit. But so for some background, I am Nisqually, Native American, as well as Blackfeet Native American. So my Indian name is on my Blackfeet side, and I'll say it again. It's Misumi Poye. Which means long time standing, which was Blackfeet's interpretation for tree. So basically, my name is Tree. So yes, I am enrolled in the Nisqually. I also work for the Nisqually in the Archives Department.
My name is Tiana Bill. I'm an enrolled member at the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. My grandparents on my father's side are Ramona Bennett and Clyde Bill, and on my mother's side, Denise Winier and Philip Acob. My father is Yelks Lebeitsut Bill, and my mother is Angela Acob. My grandmother, Ramona Bennett, is an activist for Native Americans everywhere, but she particularly did significant work with the Puyallup tribe and defending our treaty rights. And she has served as a huge inspiration for me in my life. And she definitely inspired me to project her thoughts and ideas and to project my voice and insert it wherever it's welcome.
I'm Cheyenne, and I'm a citizen of the Steilacoom tribe. My grandfather is the chairman, and so was his mother before him. And he's also a storyteller, and he taught those stories to me, and I'm a storyteller too. So I grew up very immersed in our culture.
My name is Casey Barton. I am enrolled Puyallup tribal member. I am of the Tugale family, and my grandfather is multi-descendant of Nisqually, Puyallup, and I believe Squaxin Island.
My name is Claire Keller-Scholes, and I live in Steilacoom, Washington. As you can see behind me, I'm currently at my day job. I work for Metro Parks Tacoma as the Planning and Asset Management Administrator.
What's important and is still important to us because it's a cornerstone of something firm that we could stand upon and that we could move forward with. It helps denote our rights and responsibilities, and it's something that without that we probably wouldn't be here at this time.
What was being signed away during the treaty, and that's when you're doing something that important, you need to make sure that both parties are completely aware of what they're doing. And so that was really taking advantage of the whole situation.
I think it's one of these pieces of history where if you're local, you've heard about it a lot, but you don't necessarily know the details or realize how it continues to impact us today. So I grew up here in Tacoma in the area, and I was homeschooled, so we were big on field trips. And we went and I think looked at like Medicine Creek, and we kind of talked about local history as part of our local history curriculum. But we didn't spend a lot of time about on the treaty or about the ramifications thereof. Like there's the creek, and then there was a tree there, and that's kind of where it lives, just in this point of geography, not so much in the world we all live in today.
What the significance of the Medicine Creek Treaty to me was how we, I guess, as Native Americans interpreted it. That's part of why some of the research I've done was on that side, which there isn't much, because Native Americans never had any kind of written history. A lot of ours was passed down orally, and to this day, that's a way we're storytellers. So we like to tell stories to one another. And in that way we can transfer whatever knowledge or information needs to be passed down to generation, the next generation.
Something that is significant to me about the Medicine Creek Treaty is not what it had promised or not what it had said it was going to provide, but who we were as a tribe before the treaty took place. We had thousands and thousands of years of history before the treaty was even put into place, and we had been living on this land and hunting and fishing, and we had our own community and our own society before any of this had ever even happened.
What I think was important about the Puget Sound Treaty War was that we stood and fought, because this is the land that we'd always lived upon since time immemorial. It had been passed down for generations, and that this land was our source and sustenance, and so it was very important, and so we wanted to make sure that it was always there for us, and that this was ultimately a victory because we ensured that more land was staying under our control and sovereignty to be passed down for generations.
Or the way that history is written, a lot of the times Native people are vilified for fighting back when that's what you do when people are coming at you and trying to take your land away and take your culture and your life away. And so the way that Natives are vilified for defending what was theirs is just heartbreaking, and it really does show that the victors write the history, and it's something that should be put in history, the actual truth of it, instead of twisting it.
So the significance of the Puget Sound Treaty War to me is really about how we think about wars as kind of the dominant culture. We're very much about war as being the height of patriotism. If you were in a war, you have this badge that comes with you, and that means that you were in the right. You were the hero. You were doing the right thing, standing up for your background and your people. And when it comes to something like this, like the Puget Sound Treaty Wars, I think it's a lot harder because we can't find those heroes in the same way. I think coming from it from the 21st century, we're uncomfortable. We don't want to be like the conquerors, right? As white settlers, we feel uncomfortable with that narrative that we took this land by force of arms, which is the history, right? Like we didn't just come in and everyone's happy about it. And so I think it's something that we're struggling with in terms of how can we come to an understanding of the violence that was part of the settlement of this area, and yet also understand that these were all people who were acting in the best interests of their people as they understood it.
I mean, I think for the Puget Sound Treaty War, the thing that stands out to me again is, just that the miscommunication part between the non-natives and the government at the time versus the tribal people that were already here. So that's what I like to study is not necessarily the hardships that came out of it, but the struggle. So I know struggling, that creates stronger I don't know, stronger ways of learning, or the different ways of learning, because you don't want to make the same mistakes. So I think that's what stands out, is that the struggle, the miscommunication that was going on between the tribe and the government at the time.
Something that's significant to me about the treaty war was that the people that came before us, and people even generations ahead of who we are as a tribe now, cared enough for us to fight to guarantee that we had a good way of life set out for us. I think that that fight was very selfless, and in my opinion, I don't think that it ever ended.
There was a moment just a couple months ago, maybe it was last year, because time in COVID, this whole world is, fluid, and even more than it usually is. But I was in the strip mall right past historic Fort Steilacoom, and I was going between the teriyaki place and the dollar store. And so as I was walking down this, the covered walkway there, I noticed a little traffic island. There's a tree there. There's also a stone marker there. I'm like, oh, okay, there's a lot of historical markers in Lakewood and in Steilacoom. And I come around the face of it and realize this is the marker for where Leshai was hanged. And so, again, I know just enough about the history that I am aware of it all around me. And I knew that the marker where he had been hung was in a parking lot somewhere, but I never realized it was this parking lot, which was right down the street from me. And so it's another moment of going, yeah, this history isn't just a thing that happened back in the day. This is still very much in our communities, and it needs to be, I think, elevated to the level of consciousness that hopefully this whole program is working to do. And some of the stuff that we work with is property issues. And so we have parcels and park lands that are in the reservation boundaries. And so it's very relevant to my day job in how the treaty terms and the concessions that Leshai and the rest of the warriors won through the treaty wars, those terms are still very much impacting the day-to-day work that I do in terms of how do we build parks that serve the community, and how do we make sure that we are actually serving all of the community, in particular tribal members who are in their historic reservation boundaries.
So I think, as a Native American, I really think historical traumas are real. So and I'll try to explain why I think that. So every time this is brought up, either the Puget Sound Treaty War, there's a few things that have happened in my Blackfeet history. It angers me, and I'm less angry now because I'm getting older. But in my 20s and 30s, I was very angry about things that I learned. Topics. So, in high school and middle school, we didn't learn nothing about any of this. We learned nothing. And I lived here all my life in Nisqually. And so when we took, I can't remember the actual name of it, but it was like Northwest history. So it taught you about Puget Sound and nothing about it. Very little about. I think there was a paragraph. Things are falling off. I think there was a paragraph in the book I remember in high school about Leshai. That was it. So now what's happening, like I said, is we're learning more as a tribe, as an individual, as an Nisqually individual. I have more reference. I have a lot more positive, I guess, information instead of the negative stuff where you hear, oh, Leshai did this, Leshai was running away from things. If Leshai wasn't, because this is a lot of the stuff I heard growing up was, if Leshai wasn't responsible for what happened, why did he run? He's running because they all got guns, and they got, they're a whole group of men that were chasing him. So it is the impact of the treaty war. What is that? It's historical trauma, and it's real. It's I think a lot of kids, especially me, like I said, growing up, I wasn't proud of I wasn't proud of being Native American. Knowing what the real history is, it's going to help any child's identity, identifying with Native American, being Native American.
It impacts my life daily because I work in the historic preservation department, and it's something that I'm constantly studying and researching. And it's something that I care about, making sure that the rest of our tribe knows about and is at least aware that this is an important event that happened for us.
I wouldn't say that the treaty war impacts even parts of my life. It really set the tone for my whole entire life. Growing up, I was really taught the importance of our tribe, where I come from, our history, and things that have traumatized my family to bring us to this place that we're in today. My grandma and my bloodline that extends way before me fought so hard to ensure that I could live a comfortable life, and that I could have access to my culture, and that I could have access to my language and access to all of our ways of life. I feel a tremendous responsibility to carry that on and to teach it to my daughters, and to teach them why it's so important to defend yourself and to stand up for your tribe and to, maintain your involvement.
I can't really say how it impacts me without also saying how it impacts my tribe, because our language and our dances, our songs, even some of our stories were taken away and lost, and we don't have a lot of that. And it really steals your identity, and it's extremely heartbreaking. And also because of not having that, with federal recognition and things like that, is kept from a lot of tribes because of those things being stolen by them. And it's just a really twisted system.
Chief Flesheye is awesome, and everybody should learn more about him. He's influenced me because he proves that we need to keep a good regal spirit, and in times of need or struggle, to just keep a brave face to the powers that be.
Because there's not enough knowledge about today's Native people, and this is, I really admire what you're doing, bringing in younger people and talking to them, because that needs to be known about, because since it's not, people aren't aware of what that looked like today. It looks like Native people are just a thing of the past that's gone.
I just want to share that the Medicine Creek Treaty is a very small piece of history compared to the history that the Puyallup tribe holds, and really all of the tribes that are included in that treaty. It's in no way a representation of the Puyallup tribe of Indians or anybody else that it involves. We have history that dates back to time immemorial, and we have and we're going to continue to make history, and we're going to continue to amplify our voices and to make sure that people hear us loud and clear, and so that our history doesn't get lost.
Great, thanks. That's an incredible video. And thank you again to all the interviewees, setting us off for a great discussion tonight. Jennifer, I think you're still muted. Yeah.
This far into the Zoom world. I was just saying that I'm so lucky that I got a chance to talk with all of those folks. They're just remarkable people, and it was a gift. And so thank you to them. And I'm excited to be doing this, but I'm sad it's because our last panel, I've enjoyed this tremendously. I've learned so much. And Tonight, we're going to talk about the aftermath of the treaty war, both in the time immediately following it and in the time since. And as we heard in the video, it continues to shape our lives. And the panel members and I, like in past programs, have prepared questions for our discussion tonight. And thank you for sending in to the audience your questions. They were really helpful to us in deciding what to focus on, because there are a million things we could talk about with this topic. And so we started from your questions and then narrowed it down. And since this is the last panel discussion in the series, I would like to take a moment to thank the museum and each of the panelists. I've learned so much working with you to prepare for each program. It is really rare to get an opportunity to talk with members of several different tribes about the significance of a historical event and how it has shaped our communities. And their perspectives are often different from each other's and from what I've learned in classrooms, and you've all really given me a deeper understanding of this period of Washington's history. And it's just really been great to get to settle in and talk with you. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight. So our first question is, what did it cost the tribes to protect those treaty reserved rights in the treaty war? And I'm not sure who wants to start. Danny, can I put you on the spot?
Yes, thank you. You know, the significance of what was happening right around the treaty, it was such a big turning point for the tribal people and what was going on, because essentially before the treaty was signed, relations with the people, the new people that came to our lands, were positive. We had built relationships, we were sharing and using the land, we had responsibilities that everybody was caring for the land. But the treaty really took us to a new place where the war was the result of those changes. And so immediately following that, people were removed from their villages. Our villages today are archaeological sites. They don't exist anymore. What did the tribes lose? It was no more significant than the identity of those places that were where people grew up and raised their families and practiced all their traditional cultural history and songs and the language that were talked about. It's like all of the things that were part of that. It's like the world was so changed. The war was just, hey, you know, we didn't know that things were going to be changing this much. And so let's do something to protect that. Did we protect that? No, we came back to pieces of land that now we couldn't occupy villages. Steilacoom were allowed to go back to traditional village areas, but those villages didn't exist anymore. The longhouses were burnt. People had to make new places. And so where do you go? What do you do afterwards? Did the war do anything other than maybe give us some better pieces of land that were supposed to be reservations? But there were other promises that were made there in the negotiations at the end that said all the tribes would still be given land in their own traditional areas. And that was never the plan. The intent was not to expand much more than they had to limit that down. So big changes, big losses for people that the war helped with, but didn't resolve, that's for sure.
It goes back to those earlier conversations that about the significance of place. And then if you can't keep that connection, that's a tremendous loss. Yeah. Does anybody else like to speak to that?
I want to first let you know, I think Brandon has a little bit of a delay, but I was thinking about what the youth said earlier and kind of thinking about what was lost, but also the cost benefit, I guess, of the wars as well. And thinking about how I think a lot of our ancestors and warriors were probably fully aware of that cost benefit of what they were potentially going to lose, but the value in doing that, I think both Cheyenne and Tiana, you know, they talked about how our ancestors were fighting a selfless war. So the wars in a way did we did go to reservations, many of us, we did end up losing a lot of those lands in the reservation system, but we also, because of them, were able to maintain a lot of our culture, even though we also lost a lot of the culture, lost a lot of the language. It was this cost benefit that I think our ancestors were weighing of, if we don't fight, what are we going to lose? And if we do fight, what might we be able to maintain for those future generations? And I was just kind of thinking about that after watching our incredibly well-spoken youth talk about this, that it's just kind of a perspective that I hadn't thought much about before.
Mm.
Can you imagine being in that position and making those calculations? I can't fathom it. Yeah. Warren, were you going to add something there?
There's just a few comments, Jennifer. And my hands are up to the youth also. That was a great presentation. Thank you to each and every one of them for, coming forward and sharing their deep-rooted feelings, obviously very passionate about the topic, and I'm grateful for that moment that they shared. So your question, to address your question, the cost. So two words came to mind when you asked the question. Certainly opportunity was lost, Jennifer. An opportunity to continue for the most part a peaceful lifestyle. There was a harmonious lifestyle, living off the resources provided by our generous Mother Nature. But that opportunity, those windows of opportunity quickly closed. And they've been shut. A lot of them have been shut and welded shut for since then, and we haven't been able to open a lot of them. But fortunately, there have been some progress made, and we've been able to kind of claw our way back and get familiar with some of our culture and some of our history. And I think it's going at a pace that I think is will hopefully ramp up and catch some more speed. Some of the younger people are now taking hold of our food sovereignty topics, and some of them are getting back into hunting and fishing and getting to know who their genealogy. So I think we're headed in the right direction again. So I'm really looking forward to what the young people are going to show us next about our future.
Very true. They definitely are up to something. So, Brandon, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can't really top more than what everyone else has said, but I think just what the cost. Yes, we won the war, but the cost was significant. I think from that point forward, our way of life was completely and forever changed. We, in all forced reservations, we now had what used to be neighbors are now in our neighborhood. What used to be enemies we're now having to commingle with. There was a lot of lands that were used by the same family for thousands of years are now blocked off. We now have fences. We now have this particular section, 18,000 acres for the Puyallup, that we're limited to, for the time being. And so our way of life completely changed, and was only going to get worse, as we know today. And so all these things are being forced upon us. The education system, our way of educating was considered barbaric and inappropriate. Our language was considered inferior to the English language, and so we were forced and beaten to learn English. And so our everything for us was changed from this point forward. Yes, we gained access for the Puyallup. We gained access to the rivers and to the Sound with our new assigned reservation, but we lost so much in the meantime.
So Jerry, just listening to this, something I hadn't thought of before, so I'm going to spring this upon you. But the misunderstood part that came up in the video, but then also just listening here, that do you think that the war kind of one of the costs was that it set up a military sort of response as the standard for relationships with the indigenous people? And did you ever see that in any of your research, that, you know, what could have been a civilian relationship became more of a military relationship? I don't know, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm curious.
Well, in the initial aspects of the war, it certainly did create a military situation, and unhappily, through a large part of American history, and between the government, the settlers, and the natives, that tended to be the ultimate solution in so many cases. The calling out of the militia, the sending of more soldiers. If there had not been a treaty war in a military sense, it's hard to say how different the outcome might have been, how different the geography of Puget Sound country might be today. But consider the cost too. One of the huge costs to the native population was the loss of quite a number of very significant leaders. Most of those who were identified as being part of the war effort, Leshai, Quymouth, Canasket, a number of others were all dead within either during the war or within a couple of years afterward. And that is another thing that changed the situation. Those voices might have been very valuable in trying to steer a course through the kind of challenges that both the government and the natives faced in the years ahead. And I'd like to have known, Leshai was an incredible orator, and if his voice had been present in the years following the war, things might have been different.
It's very true. There's the individuals are as important as the collective, and there's different layers of impact. Yeah, I think that's really true. Would anybody like to talk about what specifically related to your tribe was a consequence of the treaty war, or an impact of it? Because there were these wide-ranging impacts, but there were also very specific things that happened. Warren, you're nodding. Can I have you go first?
Yeah, the first thing, Jennifer, is land. Muckleshoot actually got a village out of a post-treaty village, or a post-contact village, or in most people's eyes, it's a reservation. I don't care for that word too much, but that's what we got. We've got land out of this war, recognition, and the requests from our leaders, the requests from our warriors was falling on deaf ears, and no one was listening or didn't care to respond to the needs of the people here in White River, Upper White River, Spalco in our language. And this got the attention of the governor. It's got the attention of the elected officials, and it was finally addressed. After, of course, after blood was shed, after lives were lost and sacrificed, for this need that was obviously overlooked or was pushed aside. It borders on egregious. Some of the actions that were taken by the elected officials and soldiers. It wasn't the intent, right? Left out on purpose, ignored. I think oversight is probably too polite of a word to use in this case, but that's the first thing, Jennifer, that comes to mind, that we've benefited from this. On the opposite side, on the swing side, we lost some valuable lives. We lost some valuable leaders, like Jerry alluded to. This effort costs us quite a bit. Fortunately, most of them have descendants, and so their bloodline still survives on through a lot of these panelists that you see here today.
Thank you. That makes me think, your first point makes me think about how I'm pretty sure that the non-native folks at the time did not differentiate very much between the different tribes and the differences. And the fact that the Muckleshoot reservation is on the river is really important. And they didn't really understand that at the time, or chose to ignore it. And so that not only the land was reserved, but that where it was located is so important. Yeah. That I certainly didn't understand that as a young person. That was something that I learned as I got older, and I've come to understand it. Do you mind if I ask, Warren, the Muckleshoot Indian tribe is a group of tribes and bands that came together, correct? And
that's correct, Jennifer, yes.
And would you consider that, I can see it going both ways, that the bringing people together, that there is a strength in reliance on each other, and that, but that it also represents a loss because that is not how it was traditionally. And so that distinction between the different groups was blurred.
That's absolutely right. I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, this wasn't a choice. And this was a forced hand. So, it was either this or disappear completely. And I think our leaders, had the foresight to acknowledge that, or to prepare for that. And so this is kind of like almost, it's not a resolution, but it's certainly a nice contingency plan. And then that's the way I look at it, is that this is a contingency plan, a fallback plan, just in case, so we're still here, and we're still, we're holding on to what we have left and what survived, not just the lives that in the bloodlines, but it's our guadzada, our traditional teachings, it's our culture. It's the things that we, that like you heard before, one of the panelists mentioned, it's not taught in schools, or one of the guest speakers. These are things that we can still share and pass down. So I'm grateful for that, because of our leaders had the foresight to provide that opportunity to continue that life, continue to acknowledge that life. And that's what we're doing today, is we're honoring the wishes of our elders who had the foresight to create this opportunity for us to continue. And I intend on making it it's a lifelong journey. This is what we do here as elders now. We come to opportunities like this, and we share. So that's what this means to me.
So I'm going to jump into the questions just because it's particularly apropos. Is somebody was asking, would you mind explaining what groups form the present day Muckleshoot Indian tribe?
Yeah, so there's the lots and lots of groups. My particular group, my father's bloodline comes from the Seuss Creek line on Green River. And it goes even further from there, but that's the one that I associate with. So there's the villages that are on Lake Washington, Duwamish River. Those of you who are familiar with the Black River, which used to drain Lake Washington, there was a couple of villages there. White River, obviously, Green River, Cedar River, and the watersheds that are in this vicinity also contributed to our current population that we see today. So it's a number of different villages that were along these valuable water lines and watersheds in this area, all the way down to Elliott Bay. So from the Cascade Mountain Range all the way down to Elliott Bay.
Thank you. How about anyone else? Would you like to talk to the specific experiences of your tribes?
I just wanted to add that there were some significant differences for all the tribes. So it's great that we can have this panel where we can come together and talk about the impact, because one of the things that happened during the war is they established Fox Island as a temporary reservation, and for a while it was referred to as the Steilacoom Indian Reservation, the closest the Steilacoom tribe ever had to getting a reservation. But significant regarding that is our people lived in villages that they didn't leave. Nobody left nobody left the village entirely. So there were 5 villages of the tribe that there were always people there. The older people and the youngest would stay behind when others would go out and hunt and fish in other parts. But those 5 villages had people there all the time. When I talked about those locations becoming archaeological sites, that was the result of that. You now had, here's this period of time where at least the soldiers from Fort Steilacoom said, let us protect you as well, because the reality was during this war period, there were people that were hunting and killing Indians just because they were Indians. Doesn't matter what tribe you were from. And so the offer was Fox Island was a place of sanctuary for the tribal people as well. People began to plant the land there as well. Even after the end of the war, there had to be permission given for them to stay and harvest the potatoes that had been planted there, which was a new crop for the Indian people, but something that they were expecting to do. And so now here's what's great for the Steilacoom tribe was, so Fox Island was one of those places we would travel to in the summer and other times. So we were familiar with the land, but we welcomed the people from the other tribes that were there with us and thought, all right, we'll stay here. This has removed us from our villages, and nobody is there now. Those 5 villages were completely empty, and we were never able to go back to them ever again. And so big plans had to be made for where we would go and what we would do after that. But for a while, even the thought was, all right, the leaders from the United States government stood up and made promises. Sam Young was the leader for the Steilacoom people at the time, and he made this great speech about how all of the people love land that they grew up in and they knew and needed to have land in their own areas. And all the tribes that were gathered supported that and said yes. And the government again promised every Indian will receive land that will be protected for them in their own traditional areas. And so promises were made, and people thought, okay, we'll stay here on Fox Island, we'll harvest our potatoes and we'll go back to our villages again. People didn't know yet. It's like that warp of time that we can see into the future that no, you're not going to get there. And in fact, the government is never going to give you land in your area, because the direction to Stevens was, you make sure that there are no reservations formed within the areas we intend to settle. The major communities that were going to be settled, like Seattle and and Steilacoom, which was the first incorporated town, that you will not place a reservation there. You can tell people and try to convince them that things are going to be good, but there will not be a reservation there. Ultimate goal of the government was to incorporate all the people on one reservation. The war didn't allow that to happen. So more villages. I love what Warren said. So Muckleshoot became a new place for a village to be established that wasn't available before. But boy, the world sure changed big, and people didn't know, like we know now, how deeply things were changing. So those immediate changes happened. Even 2 years later, still harvesting those potatoes on Fox Island, and then trying to figure out a way to make things work in the new world. Many of the Steilacoom people did have relatives that were within reservations, and so they went there. And so I think I'm related to Brandon. We haven't confirmed that yet, but for sure, I know we have people who are Steilacoom that got enrolled with Nisqually and Puyallup, our closest neighbors, because they had relationships there. But the Steilacoom tribe, and under the leadership of their people, continued for that hope of land in their area and some way of making that relationship, that more civil relationship that was there prior to this, work, and some hope that would happen.
That's
That's
really
the longer story. Go ahead.
That gets to that idea, though, of the two very different worldviews, and looking at a landscape and understanding how people are going to live somewhere. That if you're coming from the indigenous worldview, you're not going to be strategizing in the same way about the land ownership as somebody who's coming from a non-native perspective. And so you can see how it would not have been as clear in the moment what was kind of what wheels were turning. Yeah. So
nobody ever grasped the idea that you really will not be able to return to your village.
Yeah.
We know you've got some hope, but when you leave this island and try to journey back to your village, it will not be there.
Everything had already changed.
Yeah.
Charlotte or Brandon, would you like to speak to Puyallup's experience?
I can go first, and then I'll let Charlotte fill in the gaps. For us, I think it was, we quickly became urbanized even back then. While we were on Fox Island, we were there for a while as well. And then our leader, Squaxin, which is, again, Charlotte's relative, he became our main leader, and he, directed us to come back, asked that our relatives that had gone east to Yakima come back, and he got us all gathered as much as we could on our new reservation, trying to figure it out. But in that time that we were gone and during the war, people continued to come over, even during the wars, and they were now settling these, so-called empty lands, and we even found ourselves having to, try to live with. There were a handful of settlers that had put up claims on our reservation that had to be dealt with. That when we came back from the war, we had to kick them off, and that had its own ramifications. And then this new town of Tacoma began to flourish. And so in the years immediately following the war, and Steilacoom was right there with us in having to deal with this new urbanization, these new influx. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of non-natives arrived over a period of years. And so our impacts were, we were not allowed to live the way we could. And so we immediately started learning and trading with the settlers, and the lands that we were supposedly allowed to have were already being overrun and being used by non-natives. So here we were, we just got through this war, we just got through these talks with getting a new reservation, and all of a sudden we didn't have a chance to establish ourselves before non-natives were already coming in and taking on, and there was no there was no one there to help us out. There was nobody there to say, hey, you can't come this, you can't stay here. This is the Indian reservation. This is the Puyallup reservation. They just didn't care because they quickly realized that what Stevens had given them was valuable land. They saw that was a perfect place for a port. They saw it was a perfect place for shipping and seafood and, you know, all the shellfish. You know, they wanted to sell that, so we needed. Now we became a problem with our neighbors. So I don't know, Charlotte, if you want to throw anything in there.
No, I think that was great. In fact, I hadn't really connected those dots with the urbanization. I think that's another great example of those continued impacts even today. So the decision of our ancestors to fight for that land, and then the agreement to set that land aside as a reservation. Of course, much of that land is where our ancestors had lived since time immemorial, but a lot of our ancestors didn't live there and had to move from, whether it's the islands or the beaches of the Puget Sound or the mountains, to that reservation. And then we see that development happen, and we see that even today in the struggles that the tribe is fighting for, you know, whether it's the development of the port or fighting LNG or the railroads that ended up coming through right through our reservation, splitting our reservation in half, and taking more land away from us. We see those impacts throughout history that really all stem from the decision to set aside that specific land for the Puyallup reservation. You know, we see our youth being disconnected from some of our culture and even just our access to natural resources because of the urbanization of the Puyallup reservation. So I think that's all. It's not really an ad, it's just what Brandon said, because I think that's another example of a direct tie, at least at Puyallup, to the decisions that were made in just those couple years, even couple months of the treaty wars.
So I'm going to sound like a broken record, but that whole idea of the misunderstandings that had earlier on, there'd been instead of a military response, a conversation, and, you know, there'd been more understanding between the two, there might have been a better place. And that urbanization is such a particularly difficult one because it happened so fast and is still continuing. So Brandon, did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, that was the case when they first arrived. And you have Job Carr, who had no idea how to survive in this new rainy, muddy, cold, misty environment, right? Mm-hmm. He needed the Puyallups to help him understand and the trade with Puyallup and with Steilacoom in order to survive, you know. And so it started out like that. There was communication, but as soon as more and more people started arriving, more and more people who were entrepreneurial, you know, had the thought of gold, for instance. When the gold rush hit, we became Seattle and Tacoma became a very needed stop for the trip to Alaska, and you know, quickly people began arriving. That communication broke down, and we became a problem, and instead of a partner.
Right. And no time for relationships to form.
No, because we were a nuisance. We were in the way. They needed our land to sell lumber, to ship lumber off, to build the ships. We were in the way. Our new reservation was, you know, took up almost over half of the Commencement Bay. So we were in the way of this new flourishing city that was booming.
So I should note, and I'm sorry I didn't realize, I see you, Jerry, just one sec. Danny had to drop off because I think his connection was stopping at 7 o'clock. He was able to join us from quite a distance, so I should have planned that better, but we'll be sure and tell him thank you. And I'm glad he got to be part of the program tonight. So Jerry, did you want to add to that?
Well, just to back up a little on the story, Medicine Creek really should have come years before it did. This had been officially a territory of the United States since 1846, but nobody really started working on treaties until appear until after Washington Territory was created in 1853. And by the time we got to 1854, the situation was that American settlers had started coming in ever increasing numbers. If it had been done earlier, the American settlers could have been fit in around the native lands. And by 1854, it was exactly the opposite. These settlers were American citizens and voters, and politicians tend to pay more attention to voters. And it became a situation, okay, as Danny had alluded, we'll fit these reservations in around, we'll fit them in wherever the settlers haven't already staked their claims. So the timing was really very unfortunate. And Puget Sound could look a lot different today if that had happened earlier.
Yeah, and it's good to note too that the law was actually that it should have happened earlier, that no claims should have been allowed until the land was ceded. And, you know, the Donation Land Act of 1850 was applied to Washington before it was legal to apply it to Washington. And so you see those early claims that are not even on ceded lands. And that just led exactly to what you were just saying, that, you know, it got put the cart before the horse to have a really good resolution, as much as, you know, as good as it could be. So, this is so interesting. So I do this each time we have these programs. I get to thinking about the things you guys say, and then I get distracted. So, okay. So the next question we have is, how do the fishing wars of the mid 20th century relate to the treaty war? And we can interpret this broadly to, you know, these conflicts, because the fishing wars was one part of a series of issues, but that's sort of the most visible one in some ways. So how would you guys relate the two?
You know, it was actually Warren's father that really coined the term that I really love and have begun using myself. Is this was the second treaty war, and this was the fight for what we fought for in the first place. This was kind of like a bringing back. Hey, we were told and we were promised by the U.S. government that we could have access to all of our usual fishing areas. So that's what we're doing. We're entitled to this fish just as much as the fishermen from the commercial fishermen. And so unfortunately the state didn't feel that way, didn't believe. They said, you're supposed to stick to your reservation. You know, they were quickly you know, beating and arresting people for fishing. You know, it was unprecedented. And this started before that. You know, we'd always term the fishing wars in the 60s and 70s, but the fishing war really continued. Right, this was almost it. Immediately started after the first treaty war. There's an article. My grandfather was arrested for fishing down on the Nisqually River in 1927 and put in jail for 30 days before they could, you know, think about. They were trying to trump up charges against him just for fishing. And then my father in the 60s was arrested for fishing, but instead of with what they did, they took bales of hay and were throwing them into the river to break up their lines and throwing rocks at them from the banks of the Puyallup River, you know, forcing them off to the bank so they could arrest them, or, you know. And then we have plenty of examples from that we have video of, you know, with as far as river runs is a great video. I encourage everybody to check it out to help understand the fishing wars. And, you know, you arresting women and children for fishing. I mean, all they're doing is fishing. But because we were taking from the commercial fishermen, we were being arrested, because how dare we as Indians try to take the fish off the table in the way of life from commercial fishermen? How dare we? Even though we were fishing to feed our families as well. but because we were second, third class citizens, we weren't entitled to that right. And so we fought for it. We fought back hard, and we won that one as well, 2-0. Really think about it.
If I could hop off of Brandon's, I think I've been thinking about this question a lot because I think these panels, I know this is my first one on the panel, but I've been in the background for the last couple ones, and I'm hoping I can make this concise and not too long-winded, but we all know that the fish wars can be a panel and have been panels on their own, and I want to just acknowledge all the families and people out there who have much more knowledge on this topic than I do. But there are many connections between these wars. I think thinking on a broader level, the basic disagreements were pretty similar. There was power, control of resources, economics that were all at play. And I know that the panelists have talked in the past about how in the treaty wars, at the core conflict was a fight for land and resources. But the perspective that I think our ancestors were coming at that fight was around the love and connection that we had for the land, for the culture, for our religion, for our communities that were deeply tied to the land. So we have this, I think there's the resource connection between the treaty wars and the fish wars. But there's also a community element to it. I think that is very reminiscent of the treaty wars. I promise this is connected, but I keep thinking about my Sapa, my grandpa. Brandon mentioned his family, and I think all of the panelists probably have stories that they have individually or from their families about the fish wars. But my Sapa, Reuben Wright Sr., was a fisherman who grew up fishing on the Puyallup River in the exact place that his father had fished, his grandfather, and so on. He was jailed many, many times, like many other tribal fishermen. He was kind of like Brandon's relative. He was jailed. He was in jail on the day that my mom was born in 1955, which is 20 years more or less before the Bolt decision, which would ultimately, not lay to rest by any means, but would make a legal decision on tribal fisheries, relationship to fish runs. And so when we talk about the fish wars, a lot of people think of just, a couple year period, a decade period, maybe two, but the war was happening long before that. But I bring my grandfather up because he was one person that not fishing wasn't an option for him. It was his only means of feeding his family. It was his way of life. He didn't know any different. And he was one of many who either chose to or were forced to resist. And when his and others' livelihood was threatened, he leaned on fellow tribal fishing families throughout Washington, but also beyond. And those relationships are what built the foundation of what would become a very public, a very political fight over fishing rights. And so I feel like we talked a lot over the last couple of panels about the relationships between the treaty warriors, the Yakima relatives, all of our relatives here on the panel, and how those were integral to the success of the treaty wars. But those same bonds are what allowed for the success of the fishing wars as well. Success is a loose term. Some might say we lost 50% of the fish, but ultimately we were able to stand strong and at least present ourselves as a strong voice in these discussions and in these wars. And as I mentioned in my bio, and Brandon has mentioned, we've all mentioned, we have descendants on this panel from those treaty wars. My Sapite was one of the descendants of Squaxin as well. And we see that throughout the families who stood up during the fish wars, that a lot of them were and are the descendants of people who stood up in the treaty war as well. So I think there's this philosophical connection with the treaty war and the fish wars, but a lot of those battles are literally made up of the same communities. So I think there's this really fascinating, powerful connection of this legacy of our ancestors. Both wars instilled a sense, I think, of pride in our communities, but also this expectation that we not only will do anything, but we can do anything as a community if we lean on these family ties, on the importance of protecting our land and our resources. Those battles, these wars are just integral to who we are today. So they're deeply connected.
Guys, when you say that, it makes me think that the first war only partially settled the question. And so I can imagine that tribal leaders never had a chance to rest, right? They knew that it wasn't 100% resolved. And then that's why you see so quickly the conflict occurs in different forms and continues forward. Yeah. So how about you, Warren?
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, those are great responses. Jennifer, as a boy, I had the great honor of standing on the banks of the White River and the Green River and watching our elders, watching our fishermen perform fish ins. And I was born in 1965, so I was just a little guy. But I remember standing on the banks and watching our fishermen perform these fish-ins to send a message to not only the elected officials of our European neighbors, but also to the people of our village and our neighboring villages, that we can't give in to this overreach, to this government overreach at the state level, is how I like to define it. There has to be a line drawn, in our last event, panel event, we titled "Enough is Enough." Well, that phrase certainly applies here when dealing with natural resources. And so you asked about how it relates to the treaty war, how the fish wars relate to the treaty war. Well, you heard my father state that a lot of the people that were involved in the treaty war were also involved in treaty wars or in fish wars, in the very same bloodlines. And that phrase that my father uses, or I used to hear him use all the time, strong hearts to the front and weak hearts to the back. And the strong hearts will take care of business. Well, those strong hearts were called again to come forward and announce to the world about who we are and the things that really mean. It wasn't just bank accounts we were fighting for. You heard Charlotte and you heard Brandon reference, it's part of our identity. There's a lot of parallels, in my opinion, about the life of the salmon, about their tenacious, their tenacity to overcome all the obstacles and all these barriers to get home. Well, that same fight, that same tenacity lives in the bloodlines of these tribal people, about how they feel about their relationship with the natural resources. And this is something that I think is also important to share with the audience, is that I know that Nisqually is kind of the poster child for salmon treaty wars. But I want the people to know, I want the audience to know that these wars happened all up and down the tributaries of the Puget Sound. Puyallup had their warriors, Muckleshoot had their warriors, the Skagit River, the Nooksack River, they all had these people, that their strong hearts that came forward. They just weren't publicized, they weren't televised, they didn't make the news. And these people got just as bloody as these ones that were on the news. And they had to make plans. There's great stories about great testimony and great history about what tribal people had to do in order to prepare for these fish-ins. They had to sell things, they had fundraisers, in order to get their people out of jail. They had They had to look for volunteers. Who's going to get arrested next? Who's going to get beat up next by the police? Who's going to get shot at next by the sportsman who's wielding his sidearm or his rifle because Indians are fishing? That's those people. They weren't chicken crap. They were the real deal. Those people, yeah, and no jokes. Yeah, those people were really truly something. Tubshotted in our language. Hey, tubshotted. Big warriors, big people. Siyab. Yeah, true Siyam. So my hands go up to those people, those warriors, those at the treaty war, fishing war warriors. They really were something special, still are to this day. And I don't think enough has been done to honor them for what they've done. And that's all up and down the Puget Sound, not just the Nisqually, not just the Cowlitz, not just the Skagit or the Nooksack, all up and down, Stillaguamish. They all had their strong hearts. So
Yeah, thank you. And up the Columbia River too. I mean, you have a whole nother series of conflicts that were that idea of putting yourself in personal danger, that, a fish-in sounds more innocuous than it was, because I didn't really understand how violent they were, the response to them were, until I read more carefully into the contemporary accounts. And so I think you're right, Warren, that it sort of passed and it was, it succeeded in the court decision. And so I think this is, it's work to be done, right? Things we can still do. So we're getting a little bit later. I'm gonna have Jerry and I answer a question first, and then we're gonna go to some chat questions. And Elizabeth, I'll just assume that we can go a little bit longer because there's so much still to talk about. We have a few questions that are really interesting. So Jerry, I'll ask you first. How does the treaty war continue to affect you and your community? Because we often talk about this as a tribal question, but of course we all live under the treaties. And so how does it affect you and your community?
Well, I've got something that I wrote out here that tried to collect my thoughts. Maybe the most visible legacy of the Medicine Creek Treaty, the Fox Island Council, and the Treaty War is the geography of where we live. That's from a non-native perspective. The treaty and the creation of reservations opened the region to settlement on a massive scale, coupled with technological developments that transformed especially the urban environment in ways that were unimaginable in the 1850s. And at the same time, the presence of the reservations or the native land and the increasing visibility and vitality of the Native American population serve as a reminder that the history of Puget Sound didn't begin the day George Vancouver appeared over the horizon in 1792. And if we can consider this as a place of human habitation for thousands of years, it hopefully helps us to think beyond the moment. And that's what a healthy society needs to do. If we find value in looking backward, we may also be better prepared to look forward. All of us, panelists, viewers, everyone else on the planet has a stake in how we deal with the challenges ahead. Some things, from cultural legacies, forests, salmon runs, and other resources may have been won in the treaty war and all the struggles thereafter, but they can still be lost to all of us should we fail to summon the vision and the collective wisdom needed to steward them through the uncertainties ahead. A lot to be learned and a lot to be considered, but hopefully we can do more of both. And hopefully if we're successful at that, future generations will say, thank God they got it right this time.
Thank you. That was amazing. I thought a lot about this, and particularly after interviewing the folks for the video, and I came somewhat to the same conclusion that I'm lucky that we have the vision that was laid out in what was argued for in the treaty, what was signed in the treaty, and then what was defended in the wars. If we adhere to that, and if we really understand it, then we'll understand how to live here, right? That it's a way to, it could provide a lot of answers to things that we're all struggling with. And I think that we're finally getting to the point that we're understanding that and using that knowledge. And so we're just incredibly lucky that people had the wherewithal to hold their ground and know. I just loved, it was Tiana, I think, that said the care for the future generations. And Nettie was teasing me, but I got all teary when she said that, because it was, you just realize that literally that care has been passed to the generations. And then you could hear it in her voice that, she was caring for the generations that were going to come after her. So I think that's a pretty remarkable historical legacy to have for a place, even if it's not been recognized for what it is by the non-native communities for so long. But we can all learn and move forward, I guess. So, okay, so I will pivot here to some of the chat questions, and there's some good ones. So one of them is, what do you hope to see for the STI material for the tribes of the Medicine Creek Treaty? And I'll just put the aside that the STI material is since time immemorial curriculum, which talks about tribal sovereignty and is taught in Washington schools. So what, I guess the question is, what do you hope that school children that are in the areas of the Medicine Creek Treaty learn as part of the STI curriculum?
I saw my boss pointing to me, so I guess I better answer. Yeah, so the Since Time Immemorial curriculum, I think, is a great resource and a great starting point. And I think it's been, especially lately, the State Office of Native Education has emphasized that it's supposed to be a starting point. And I think for us at the tribe, when we're working with schools and curriculum writers, we are asking folks, educators, to use Since Time Immemorial as that starting point, and then take the resources that local tribes are developing, these local histories, and weave it into that curriculum. So I guess it's not so much what I'm hoping to see from the Since Time Immemorial curriculum, but what I'm hoping to see educators on all levels, administrative level all the way down, and even our parents and local families and folks, is to ask that local history, this local tribal history, be taught throughout all grade levels, throughout all disciplines, and not just the history. We talked today about the fish wars, and we saw our youth talk about the lasting impacts of those histories. And so bringing it to modern day tribal people, who we are. And so I guess my mind, as someone who works a lot with local school districts, is we're really looking to the educators to do some of the research on their local tribal communities and incorporate those perspectives into what's being taught in the school. It's kind of a short answer. I could go on for longer, but that's what I'm hoping for.
But that specificity, right, to not just take it as a group and generalize it, I think is just so important. Yeah. Anyone else? That is very much your area of expertise. And Charlotte and I have talked a little bit about how we can facilitate all of that, History Link.
Also, the podcast and the maybe future curriculum coming from this very panel.
That's right. That's going to be invaluable. Yeah, there's so many topics, particularly in the questions that we got ahead of time, that we could cover. We're hoping we cover in the podcast that I can't wait to listen to. So another question we have here is, were the treaty wars here different from or typical from the other US government wars with tribes elsewhere? I don't know the answer to that.
I would say the outcome was different. We went from all being assigned 1,200 acres to, I don't know the acreage for other tribes, but I mean, Muckleshoot got land. I mean, 100%, they gained all their, a whole section of land that they had to fight. They had none in the original treaty. After the Fox Island Council, they had land set aside for them. Puyallup went from 1,200 acres to over 18,000, although that's a whole story in itself. We originally, Fox Island gave us 30, we got 18 somehow. So we actually gained land back then. That's very different from, at least what I know. There may be other instances throughout the Indian wars, throughout the history of the United States, but ours was different in the fact that we got land back. We fought and won land back instead of having it be completely taken. A lot of those reservations, especially in the Southwest, Midwest, were completely forced off traditional lands. So
Yeah, those mass movements.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. Yeah. Warren, how about you? You look like maybe to add something?
Yeah, I agree with Brandon. Brandon nailed it. Also, I think it's not that there was the big difference. I mean, the objective was the same, right? To relocate Native Americans, get the Native Americans out of the way, and so that the European progress can continue and move forward. I mean, that was kind of a quick fix, and I think there's. Yeah, I'm trying not to be too offensive about it. I'm trying to be polite, but there was just a horrible the way it was handled across the nation. It was just brutal. Genocide is one of the words that comes to mind. In these efforts to really do away with the entire population altogether, and I think it's still happening today on some levels. This effort is continuing by our big brothers and elected officials, in some regard. So, but these efforts were horrible and inhumane and almost to the point of unforgivable, Jennifer. So these wars, they have that in common. But you've heard Brandon reference also in this particular instance, the tribes, in my opinion, benefited fairly well and came out on top in the long run. But in the short run, I think Jerry talked about it earlier, that the war on paper says that we lost. But I think in the long run, though, from my perspective and from my opinion, it looks like we won.
Yeah, there was so much suffering, and I think this is, there's so many books written on this, but I just read the biography of Kit Carson, who I actually didn't know that much about before. He's such an iconic figure that I didn't really know the particulars, but it's a really well-written book that really gives a sense of that just unrelenting effort to clear the land of people, and in the Southwest, that I hadn't really appreciated how long and hard that battle was to retain land there. So let's see, Jerry, I wanted to ask you, because this is definitely something that you have that background in. How would you compare it to other areas?
Well, we seem to see a lot across the West of the creation of reservations, and then the chopping up of those creations. As one of the posts on the chat said, whenever a valuable resource was found on the land that was set aside for the natives, be it gold or other resources, a lot of times then that reservation would be reduced. We saw that the whole state of Oklahoma, and more than Oklahoma at one time, was native land, and And if you look at a map of Oklahoma now, you see just how much was taken later. Almost every treaty had that elastic clause. It said something along the line of the government reserves the right to relocate as needed. You found out just how sinister that clause could be again and again. The Nez Perce War came about because of that. The original reservation was much larger. It was reduced twice. And finally, when you hit enough reductions and enough taking of land that has been promised in perpetuity, people fight back.
Thank you. So there's two questions that I think we won't have time to get into, but I will say that they are excellent podcast topics. That's become my refrain. And also potential further programs. And I know this is something that a lot of people are thinking about, is how do you commemorate these big events in American history with a more mindful lens? And then how do you acknowledge the harm that's been done? One of the questions was, how do you heal from these sorts of things? And what role particularly do non-Native people have in that? And I mean, I'm certainly, the tendency is you want to fix it, right? And that's hard to do because the damage is deep. But I think that's, Elizabeth is listening. Would be a very interesting conversation for another program. I don't mean to give it short shrift, but that's a big topic. And but I think it's good to note that that is a question of what do we do? And this isn't the end of it. There's other things to grapple with. And so I think it would be worth a new conversation about that. And so, but happily, one of the questions segues very nicely into our last segment, which is, are there other resources that you would recommend that people look into? And that was what we wanted to end with, is we just barely hit the tip of the iceberg with these conversations. We could have gone on for hours. And so I was going to ask each of you, where would you send people? And I had asked Danny, knowing that he was going to have to leave, and he suggested their cultural center is undergoing renovations right now, but you can always email the tribe, he said. And once that reopens, you can visit. Saturdays, they're usually open. And so I will put that in for him, but then I'll pass it off to whoever would like to go first about where else people should go. Who's reaching for their unmute? There's Brandon.
Well, I mean, I don't have, I know we have the Puyallup Tribe Historic Preservation Department has a Facebook page. We post multiple times a week, sharing our history and sharing stories and other information about the tribe, and really wanting to just help people understand that we have a really strong, rich history that we'd love to share, and just it's another way of reminding people also that we're still here. I saw somebody put in the comments here, Cecilia Carpenter, but that's something that I know Judy Wright from our tribe has always preached as well. Tell people we're still here, we're still here. So I know, Charlotte, is it up and finished yet? Is it live? So coming soon. Have a resource page that will help all this information. Our Facebook page we will probably be putting that out once that resource page is available for the general public. We have information that we get on a regular basis, especially in November, about all the resources we can to tell you about the Puyallup tribe. And so we're compiling that onto a one-stop shop that will link you with the historic preservation, our Muckleshoot language program, and our culture department, so we can get guide everybody to a one-stop area where they can get all the information they need to learn about us, and ask us to come out and present, and just help you guys become educated on who we are as a people, and who we were and have been and always will be as a people.
Yeah, you guys have amazing resources, and your Facebook page is the bomb. I love all the cool stuff you guys post. So, how about you, Warren?
Yeah, the Muckleshoot also has the social media resources. But I'd also encourage those in the audience who have a research bug or a history bug to come and visit our office. Our preservation office program has a research library, and it's loaded with a lot of out of print material, archival material, books that are really hard to find or difficult to check out at your local library. So there's a process, of course, because of COVID, but even before COVID, a research permission is still required to access the research library. But it's not a very big one, but it does contain some books that I think researchers would find pretty valuable. And I also like Jennifer. History Link has some really. I want to do a plug for History Link. I think that's it's always fun to get lost in History Link and follow some of the tags that show up when you do a search. The University of Washington Suzzallo Library. Those people who are familiar with that resource, you could get lost down in the Suzzallo Library, and you could spend weeks and months and months and months reviewing some of those documents. I highly recommend the University of Washington Suzzallo Library. Even online, they've got some material that you can access. But going to the Suzzallo Library itself is spot on. I mean, you can't get any better than that. But those are just a few of my recommendations to the audience.
Awesome. We do have one quick question: is where is the history library? I assume they mean the one at the tribe.
Oh, it's located in the Philip Starr building, so it's at our main administrative office. Donna Hogerhughes is she's the gatekeeper. That's who you need to reach out to her. Donna Hogerhughes at muckleshoot.nsn.us. You should be able to get a hold of her there, or you can call the front desk 253-939-3311 and ask for Donna Hogerhughes or the preservation program, and you should be able to get that'll get the wheels turning.
She's lovely. Yes, I've worked with her. Okay. Cool. And Charlotte, you wanted to add something about the
Oh, I was just thinking, real quick, I saw the questions that we talked about that we can't address fully, but how do we support, how do we work with the tribe? And just tying those to the resources, a friend and colleague at the tribe, he often says, don't lead with ignorance. And I think that's what I often say when we get, Native Heritage Month rolls around, we get all of these questions, is and Netzi would say this, she couldn't be with us tonight, but do your research, do find those resources. They're out there from the tribes, from our perspective, and sit with those, really sit with them before trying to jump and take action. Well, action's important. Just read through those resources, find out what's important to the tribes, and ask, what positions of power do you hold to make a difference or to uplift those histories? So just kind of building those questions of, well, what do I do? I think build that foundation and really absorbing those resources that all of the tribes here have been putting out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Jerry, did you want to add any?
Well, one resource, just from a local perspective, is the Northwest Room at Tacoma Public Library. That's finally reopened after COVID. It's open by appointment only. It takes several weeks to get an appointment right now, but it's been an incredible resource for anyone trying to write any kind of history of our region. It's very encouraging to see how welcoming the tribal resources are becoming. It's one of those things where a bridge of trust had to be built. In the 1980s, when I was working on Remembered Drums, it was a very different situation. Some of the, the fishing wars were still on, and a non-native, wanting to come in and do research there was looked on with considerable suspicion, and rightly so. But hopefully that's one of the things that's coming out of assemblies like this, where we can start to talk to each other instead of talk about each other. And that's where trust is ultimately built.
That's a lovely note to stop on. Oh yeah, Brandon, go ahead.
We cannot forget, the National Archives up in Seattle Sandpoint. We as the tribes fought hard to keep that place here. Let's not forget about them, and they're a great resource. Even we use them for our own archives, our own research as well. So use them bountifully.
It's really true. You can't, going back to the primary sources on the non-native side can be illuminating just by experiencing them. But we've been talking a lot at History Link about how do we help people understand more about who is writing the history, and not just have the anthropologists stand as neutral, because they were bringing their own worldview and their own backgrounds to their study and their publishing. And so it really is good to immerse yourself in those documents and just kind of get a feel for what stories are being told and by whom and where they collected. So yeah. Okay, well, I'm loath to stop, but we're up, our time is up, and thank you again. You all are amazing. So Elizabeth, I don't know if you want it. There you are.
Yeah, thank you all again. It's been a tremendous 4 programs running. I really appreciate all the effort everyone has put in to collaborate, really direct what this program looks like. And the inclusion of the video in the last 2 just really speaks to all the conversations ahead, all these young voices contributing. So I'm really looking forward to learning more. Thanks everyone for joining us. You can email us at fortandnisqually@tacomaparks.com to follow up with future efforts, but just reiterate, also reach out to all of these panelists and visit all these sites that have been recommended to keep your learning continued, so we can further understand this world we live in and the world as it will continue to be.
And thank you, Elizabeth, for all your work. I feel
yes, thank you, Elizabeth.
Absolutely. Yeah, been nothing but my pleasure. Good night, everybody.
Good night.